Welcome to my second Megamix. Min waited for me after my friend's shift by Bench Lauren on Creepy Encounters on Reddit. I, female 23, staying with my friend, also female 23, for a couple of weeks in the town I grew up in. She works at a restaurant. Without giving away too many details about it, it's a local pizza place with a river nearby, a movie theater, restaurant, boutique. We entered through the parking garage on the bottom floor, which has 3 stories, both elevators and stairs. This is important. Her shift is about 6 hours, so I decided to do some shopping, listen to music, and walk around before eating at the restaurant my friend works at. And I was sitting at the bar in the corner alone, listening to music. A bigger man approached me. He had a security guard beanie on. It was incredibly dirty and tattered up. He was muttering, and his eyes were barely open. What I got from his muttering was, I like your, is anyone sitting here? But keep in mind, this was all incredibly muttered. But I'm just guessing from what he was trying to say. All of this was said, he was switching back and forth between looking at my eyes and staring at my chest. I told him multiple times I couldn't understand what he said. After a bit and back and forth, I put my headphones back around my neck, and he left me alone. I told my friend about what happened immediately. I tried to shake it off, but hoping it was just an isolated incident. If this story ended here, I wouldn't be writing about it, unfortunately. About an hour later or so, I see someone approaching the bar out of my left corner of my eye, and I felt their eyes on me. I didn't look. Somehow I knew it was him. But somehow I knew it was him. My heart started beating really fast, and I texted my friend. I told her I felt really sketched out. I wanted to believe that it was just a misunderstanding, and was just letting my anxiety get the best of me, but I couldn't shake that feeling. 30 minutes or so later, she gets off, and we walk towards the parking garage stairs to get into her car. I saw him sitting on the bench, waiting for me. The benches aren't super close to the elevators. They're closer to the restaurant, if anything. The second I spotted him, my blood ran cold. He saw us walking towards the stairs to the parking garage, and he started running towards us. I was face to face with him by this time. We got to the top of the stairs. We booked it back to the restaurant, and used the employee elevator to get to her car, and an employee escorted us to her car as well. The employee told us that there was a lot of cases of homeless people who walked around the restaurants, so I presume he was homeless and he was just walking in and out of restaurants until he saw me. I'm incredibly thankful that I trusted my gut, and that I saw him when I did. I didn't know what would have happened if I didn't see him first, but I really don't want to find out. This story is by Plastic Reflections 40 on Reddit from No Sleep. My brother went missing, but something found me. Back in 1992, my brother Boone went missing. Our family has always lived in North Dakota, but Boone had always dreamed of leaving. In 1990, Boone was accepted to the University of Miami. His freshman year, he met a couple of good friends, and they all moved into a beach bungalow. Their first summer, he had been living there ever since. In late August of 1992, Boone called home and I answered it. It was around 1 a.m. and he sounded frantic. He said there was a hurricane about to hit and it was going to be bad, and he was leaving to come home. He said something was wrong and he could feel it building around him in the air, and I told him the plan. I told him to meet me at the first Greyhound bus station past the Florida-Georgia border, and we could drive home together. I wanted to make sure he was safe because he was really scaring me. Boone said he would call home again soon, and he got to the bus station. I told him I was already en route, so just let Mom know he was safe and waiting for me. I packed a small bag and cash, left my mom a note, and biked to the bus station. I was really freaked out though. My brother was a dreamer and creative. He wasn't one to panic or really to frighten easily. I got to the bus station and took note of the people there immediately. Only 4 others, 2 pairs of males and their female companions. The closer pair was to the right, in the front row behind the driver. The woman looked frightened. The man looked as if he was trying to keep his demeanor calm. The other couple was even more strange. They sat towards the back, on the left side. The man was sleeping against the window. But the woman had giant dark eyes. They were glassy and shiny. She looked as if she had been interrupted from her crying over a funeral wake. Her mouth was open, slack-jawed, and I could see too many teeth. She wouldn't take her eyes off of me, and I could almost feel them poking the back of my head as I sat down 2 rows behind the first couple. The bus took off, and I tried not to think of anything but my brother, and the strange lady staring at me. I pulled out a book and started to read it. I didn't hear the first plinking sound until we were in South Dakota a few hours later. It was faint over the background noise, but it was a distinct plastic on floor plink, plink, plink. As day broke, we took our first stop. I decided to get off the bus and buy a couple of snacks, to relieve myself in the bathroom as well. I didn't turn around when I stood up, just exited. When I returned to the bus, I took a deep breath and stepped on, hoping that the woman had fallen asleep, or better yet, gotten off. No, instead her companion seemed to have disappeared as well as the other couple. It seemed as though the woman hadn't even moved, but she just stared at me. I took my spot where the other couple had been sitting before, and tried to forget that she was still on the bus. Plink, 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 plink. The noise seemed to go on for hours, like an irregular leaky faucet dripping pebbles onto linoleum. When we reached Tennessee, she got off the bus, but as she passed me, she touched my shoulder and said, "Not yet." I couldn't even bring myself to even glance at her. I was trying not to shake out of my skin. Her voice was so hollow and raspy, it was like it belonged to a broken drive-thru speaker. She smiled and exited, though I thought she might break her neck to continue staring at me as she left. As soon as the bus lurched forward, I got up and went to where the woman had been sitting. I looked down and saw a pile of human and animal teeth. The man, who I thought had left the bus previously, was slumped in the seat, almost falling forward onto the floor. When we got to the next bus station, the driver called the police and I was transferred to a new bus. The whole situation was very unsettling to me. When I got to the final Greyhound station in Georgia, I looked around for my brother. His car wasn't there, and I didn't see him anywhere. I called home with a payphone, and my mom answered, and I asked if Boone had called, and she said no, he hasn't, so I just sat there and waited. I waited a full day at the station. He never showed. I called home again, and Mom said she still hadn't gotten a call from him either. I called Boone's house, and the line just rang, and rang. I broke down crying on the bench. I got back home, and Mom told me that she had some news. She had seen that Hurricane Andrew had swept through South Florida and ravaged the state. There was deaths and many reported missing. My mom had called the school when they reopened for classes to see if Boone had showed back up, which they told us no, he didn't. We then called the police and filed a missing persons report. My mom and I went down to Florida together the next week to help search for Boone. And the others, including his roommates, we'd never found anyone, not even Boone. We still don't know what happened to him that day. His car was never seen, and because his roommates were missing too, we didn't know. We could never figure out where he was last. In fact, most of their home had been destroyed. Most of Boone's personal items were either swept away or he had taken them with him. Since then I had suffered debilitating nightmares that make sleep basically impossible. I have flashbacks of seeing that woman, and the dead man, and Boone, the destruction the hurricane caused. It comes back and hits me whenever I'm awake. I spent the first year after Boone went missing in bed, hardly eating, almost catatonic. But as time marched on, the image and nightmares slowly, and I mean very slowly, started to fade, and I could begin to recall the better times I had shared with Boone. Today I had visited the headstone my mom had made last year in honor of Boone. It was early evening, and I remember as I walked up to the headstone, I could see a stack of something. It wasn't there before. As I got near, I pushed aside the flowers and noticed it was a pile of teeth. As I examined further, I noticed animal teeth there as well. I stood up, and the woman from the bus more than 30 years ago was standing in front of me. She was exactly the same as I remembered her from all my nightmares, and all she said was, "Soon." This story is from Najee Colette on Reddit. Let's Not Meet. A stranger tries to steal my dog. This happened Christmas 2019. I, female 26, and it sticks with me till this day. I thought about sharing my story many times. I never was sure that it was scary enough. I guess you decide. My then boyfriend, now husband, and I decided to meet for dinner at a Christmas market here in Switzerland. He had picked up our dogs from doggy daycare, and I would get them after work. Some things that are good to know. At this point, we had our dog for about a year. He's called Bean. He's a medium-sized dog, and before he came to Switzerland, he was a street dog in Italy. He was about 2.5 years old at the time. He loved and still loves to get all the attention he can. Also, Christmas markets are incredibly busy, especially after work. People will meet there with friends to eat dinner and drink milled wine. When we got to the Christmas market, we realized that it was way too busy to walk through with a dog, and I set my boyfriend off to get my favorite street food, Millowok. I waited at the edge of the market with Bean. Bean likes to greet everyone who looks at him, and by that point I had gotten used to talking with strangers because my dog wanted to meet them. So I wasn't too concerned at first when a dude came up to me. Full transparency, I don't remember word for word what he said. I'm not even sure what language he was happening in. I do remember that Bean was happily greeting the guy, trying to stand against him and licking his hand. The guy asked for his name and what breed he is. And I told him Bean is a Pinscher mix. That when the situation started to turn. The man insisted that he must be a Banshee. How could I say he's a Pinscher? All of a sudden, he switched. There's no better way to explain it. He grabbed Bean's leash and said, "I go now." And he tried to walk off with my dog. Thankfully, I had a firm grip on the leash. I was incredibly confused and frustrated and stammered that he could not take my dog. He was increasingly more angry every second that I didn't let go of the leash. I loudly told the man to leave me alone, and Bean started to bark at the man. I've never seen Bean this angry and scared at the same time. Thankfully, the man let go of the leash and slipped into the crowd. I was left standing there dumbfounded and a mess of a dog. Bean was barking and shaking, so I knelt down to calm him down, holding him and talking to him. My boyfriend was still somewhere in the crowd waiting for our food. After a while, a woman walked up to me and told me not to put my heel to the floor, as she had just seen someone put a firecracker there. I don't know the name of this firecracker. It's like a small thing that you usually throw at the floor to make a boom sound when on impact. Someone had put it under my heel of my shoe so it would explode when I put my heel down. I don't know what's worse, that some guy tried to steal Bean, or someone else who saw a distressed dog and thought, wow, let's scare that dog a bit more. I think the worst thing for me was, apart from that woman who warned me, no one helped me when I was harassed by the weird guy. I even loudly told him to go away, and there were other people standing very close, just watching. Bean was the one who scared off the guy in the end. Thankfully, the events of that evening had no lasting impact on Bean. He still loves to greet strangers. I still remember it and don't think I will ever forget it. Three People with White Face Masks by Dolly, 1992. From Creepy Encounters on Reddit. This happened last night. I was almost home after a long day of traveling. It was approximately 1 a.m., and I rounded a corner and stopped at the intersection, right near my house. The light was red, and I slowed to a stop. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw three people on the sidewalk. They were dressed in all black and wearing white face masks, or face paint, or a combination of the two. One was crouched on the ground, while the other two were standing crooked. They were still as statues, and I came to a stop. But when I looked at them, they all started crawling and walking towards me. I was exhausted, and apparently in that instant of terror, my instinct was to just laugh and shake my head like I was in on the joke. They were super close to my car, but thankfully the light turned green, and I was able to get out of there before they reached my car. Since you could see the corner of my house from the intersection, I ended up driving for quite a while, and then turning around once it felt like enough time had passed, so that they wouldn't follow my car pulling into the street I lived on. I imagined it was just some teens playing a prank, but afterwards, I was thinking about being a school night and most people wouldn't be out having a sleepover in the middle of the week. I'm debating on if it's worth calling the non-emergency line to report it, in case, regardless, I shouldn't be going out past sundown for quite some time, and I'd likely invest in some door locks or reinforcements. A registered pedophile flirted with me at work by I'm Just Existing 00 Creepy Encounters on Reddit. So I, 18 female, work at a bakery, and it's not often that we get creepy people as customers. But the other day I was working at the register, and an elderly man walks in, and I always say, "Hi, welcome, how are you?" And he didn't look at me or acknowledge what I said. He immediately pointed at a cookie and asked what flavor it was, to which I said the name of it, and he asked what all was in it, and I started listing out what was in it, and he cuts me off and said, "Stop," all flustered like. Then he finally looked at me and leaned his face over the counter until it was about a foot away from my face, and he says, "Wow, you're a really pretty girl. You're so attractive, you know that, right?" I just said, "Thanks," in a monotone and looked down at the ordering screen, because I felt very uncomfortable, and it was getting worse. He then continued and said, "You must get that a lot, don't you? That you're so beautiful." And I said, "Oh, no, not really." He said, "Oh, well, you're such a beautiful girl. How old are you anyways? 14? 15? Surely you're 15, eh?" That's when my gut was telling me something was wrong with this dude. I looked up at him and said coldly, "No, I'm an adult." He gets all antsy with his body language and says, "But what age?" And I said, "An adult," because I don't trust him knowing my age. He could already see my name from my name tag we wear on our hats, and it already made me feel very nervous that he knew that piece of information about me, plus where I work. He then shook his head like he was disappointed and said, "Okay, well, you're just really attractive, and I hope you know that." I said, "Okay," and then he ordered really quickly and left. The point of sale saved his full name and his credit card after he placed his order, and my coworkers and I looked up his name and the town we were located in on the registered sex offender website, and it turns out he has a criminal record on it, which then made me feel sick to my stomach about the whole interaction he was trying to have with me. Creepy woman followed me in her car. By What's Cooking Beach on True Scary Stories on Reddit. I had not experienced today that I still can't shake. A blue Lincoln Nautilus braked suddenly in front of me and swerved as I was driving down the main road in the city. I hung back and drove around them and went on my way. Then I started noticing the same car driving behind me for a while. Not too weird yet, but maybe they're going the same way. But now I'm getting hyper aware and started switching lanes, speeding up and slowing down. This is going on for 15 minutes on my drive. They kept in place with me every move I made. One time, I pulled into the right lane to slow down. They drove up next to me and stared over. They didn't look mad or as if they'd unknowingly cut them off or something. She just stared, and I stared back, and I saw that it was a blonde woman with shoulder tattoo, maybe in her 40s. I'm also a woman, I'm in my 30s, and I was definitely surprised to see that this was the person that was messing with me. I put on my blinker to turn at the next light, and they turned off into the shopping center on the right. After I make the turn and drive a little ways, I see them behind me. Again, she zipped across the parking lot and was somehow behind me. I was on my way to pick up my 6-year-old niece, and was almost there at this point. There's no way I'm going to lead this freak there, because now I'm certain that she's following me. So I slow all the way down, so she has to drive past me again, and when she does, she smiles and makes this odd gesture, sort of a wave salute, and then zips off onto the highway. We've been driving parallel, too, before that last turn. From the moment I saw that car, I had a bad feeling. I don't know what this person's up to, but she made my skin crawl. People driving all kinds of reckless in this area, and act all kinds of creepy ways. There was nothing like anything I'd ever experienced. All of my alarm bells were going off. I didn't get her plate because she was behind me for most of the time, and my adrenaline was way through the roof. If she If she had engaged when I slowed down, my plan was to record her until she backed off. That's my go-to with psycho drivers. But her reaction actually stunned me. Stay safe out there, people. People are wild and desperate. Story 1. I am possessed by Mission Bus 3619 from True Scary Stories on Reddit. So, a few days back, I returned from my college campus. For a bit of backstory, we are 2 girls living in a small flat. Nothing too fancy. Although yesterday night, we thought it would be a nice idea to have some guests around for the usual gossip and tomfoolery. So it was around midnight, and we were just joking around while we were preparing some mac and cheese for the girls. I am the chef of the group. I was bringing the tray to the table, and when I started to feel my head getting lighter, and I still remember the tray falling out of my hands, although I don't remember me hitting the floor. Well, either way, I woke up the next day in my roommate's bed with her sleeping on mine. First thing in the morning, I apologized. I had a history of weak immune system and illness. However, she was puzzled, and all my friends denied me falling to the floor or being unconscious. In fact, according to them, we chatted until 2, and I fell asleep on my roommate's bed while talking. Am I going insane? This is not the first time something like this has happened. However, it's the first time that something like this has happened where I am not alone, and it's somehow scarier. Does anyone know what this is? Is my mind playing tricks on me? Or is it some kind of paranormal thing? If you like the video so far, please consider subscribing. Story 2. I barely escaped by Flower Lily 97 from Let's Not Meet on Reddit. So this actually happened about 2 hours ago. I, 26 female, and my boyfriend, 36 male, decided to go to the store and get oil. We have to go out about 45 minutes just to get out of the bad part of the city. But it's the only European store that actually has the stuff that I grew up eating. My family and I are from the Ukraine, but I live in the USA, and it's difficult finding authentic places that have exactly what we had, and this is the only place that I found that had it, down to the exact brand. As we were driving, we were on a 3-lane road, which we need to get on one of those mid-sections to U-turn type of lanes. We get into the lane to the left, and a black car blitzes from the far right lane through my middle lane and cuts us off at the left lane, which my boyfriend and I are like, WTF, and then they stop at a green light for a U-turn. My boyfriend gently honks the horn twice in a nice way in case they were on their phone to tell them to go, since ours is green. They go forward, and then they go to a parking lot directly to the right of the store that we need to go to. The car is in front of us, which was now to the far left lane, goes through another 2 lanes and then drives onto the sidewalk and rides nearly to our bumper, pressing their horn the entire time. My boyfriend eventually decided to stop a few feet further than the store instead of parking at it. And at this point I realized that the car camera was not on. I can't remember the name in English. It's the camera that records in the front and back as you drive. I tap it since it usually starts recording when it feels motion. It didn't turn on, and we realized it somehow was disconnected from the car. As he's trying to get the camera plugged back in, the car pulls up, and I see 3 guys about 18 to 20 in there. All 3 are African American. They roll down their windows, and the driver reaches for something, about to take it out, and I'm screaming at my boyfriend, "Just drive, go, go, go!" And my boyfriend slams on the gas pedal, and we drove off. And then the black car does that too. And my boyfriend started doing donuts in the parking lot to get their car to back off, while I'm screaming, "Oh God, the police! Call the police! I need to call the police!" I managed to dial 911, and he's doing the last donut, and then he suddenly begins driving out of the parking lot. The black car was still chasing us, as I finally got an answer from the police. They asked where we were, and I blanked out and sputtered in panic, and then we are currently being chased, and my boyfriend yells out. He used to do Uber for 7 years, and knows every street name by heart. These guys kept going after us until we were about 3 to 4 blocks away from the police station. We stayed on the line. They probably realized where we were going, and swerved to a random road on our left. At some point, we got disconnected from the officer, but he called me right back, and they stayed on with us until we pulled into the station. We explained what happened to the officer. He was nice and offered to escort us back to the store, following our car in case the guys were still there. We showed the skid marks to the officer. The officer said was nice as a joke. It was all good. He did the paperwork, and we grabbed sunflower oil I wanted, and my boyfriend tried authentic Slavic ice cream for the first time, which we agreed is 100% better than American, and we decided to cut our day short, thanked the officer, and went home. My boyfriend said he was amazed at how quickly I made all the right decisions, and was surprised I even called the police because he was aware that I have a history of being SA'd by 2 off-duty officers about 4 years ago, and I have been terrified to call or speak to officers since. But I was so terrified of getting shot, and my only priority was to have the police, and so my boyfriend is safe. If something happens to him, I was so terrified, my chest hurt, and I'm so happy that we were safe. My boyfriend is now laughing, saying that we can prove front-wheel drive Dodge cars can do great donuts. I genuinely hope I never see or run into those 3 guys ever again. Let's not meet ever again. Story 3. A creepy man watches me while I babysit, by IKEA Lover 3000 on Creepy Encounters on Reddit. Before I start, I must say I haven't told this to many people, mostly because it was a very scary experience for me. This happened in Kelowna, Canada, in the 80s. I was about 14 and was babysitting at a neighbor's house. Well, the parents were gone. They had a nice house like most of the neighborhood, and it was right on the corner of where 2 streets connected. My house was right outside of a bus stop across from theirs. This happened pretty late at night, in the winter, so it was dark out and maybe 11 or 12 at night. I was sitting on a couch when I thought I saw something through the back door. It was one of those glass doors that lead to the back porch, but I couldn't see very well through it. You know, when the lights are on and it's dark out, so you can't see anything but the black and your reflection. That's what I saw. But I could have sworn it looked like something was there. So I got up and walked close to the window, and there definitely looked like there was something out there, but I couldn't see. I got closer, but I still couldn't see. Honestly, I should have just turned on the lights, but I put my face right up against the glass and cupped my hands around my eyes to look out. Maybe about 1 inch from my face on the other side of the glass was a man. He was tall and pale from what I could see, which wasn't very much. He kept staring at me very scarily. Keep in mind, this is the backyard. Naturally, I jumped back and let out a small scream. But stupid teenage me didn't call the cops. I just called my parents instead. My father came out and took a look, but there was still footprints in the front and backyard. I don't remember much after that because I felt very unreal. You never expect this stuff to happen to you until it does. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this story because I sure didn't enjoy experiencing it. 1. I Saw Something Disturbing by Mr. Nightmare 420 on True Scary Stories on Reddit. Hello, I'm a 17-year-old female, living in Maine, near the border of the US and Canada. I live in a very small town and there's nothing really interesting happening. I like to wander around the woods when I can, until this event happened to me about a week ago. It was a normal day and it was perfect weather for wandering in the woods. So that's exactly what I did. I'm not sure how much time had passed, but I know I was deep in the woods. With my 1-year-old German Shepherd, I came across the fence with barbed wire all around the top, so climbing it wasn't an option. By the time it started to get dark, on the other side of the fence I saw a really run-down looking warehouse. I found an opening that was barely big enough for me and my dog to fit through. At the back of the building, I hopped through a broken window and started wandering inside the building. I was making my way, looking at the glow-in-the-dark spray paint. It was very creepy. I kept going until I got to the stairs that looked to be a fresh pool of blood right before the top stair. And there was a long bloody trail leading down the stairs along with the bloody footprints. I walked down there scared and curious. I followed the trail down the stairs in a long dark windowless hallway into a room where there was one of those chair things you would see at the dentist's office. When I rounded the corner there was a man eating what was left of a human body. The body was placed on a chair, and he was eating everything. The room was covered in blood and satanic symbols all over the room. I'm not sure if the man noticed me, but I didn't care. I started running, and he didn't chase me. I told the police everything, but they didn't believe me. Neither did my parents. I know this sounds totally made up and out of a horror movie, but please, I need someone to believe me. Anyone, please. 2. I Was Almost Kidnapped or Worse by Roxy G. Slut from True Scary Stories on Reddit. A few months ago, I left my friend's house at about 3 or 4 in the morning. I was 17 and drove a very recognizable blue car with stickers all over the back. And as I was on the road leading to my neighborhood, I realized that there was a car behind me. It had been there for a very long time. It was a bigger white car, and the brights were on, so I couldn't see who was inside. I got extremely suspicious and decided to drive past my neighborhood into a different one. So I turned left into the neighborhood that made a right turn. They were still behind me. I made another right turn, and another until I was out of the neighborhood, and I made an extremely sharp right turn back into the neighborhood. This white car made the exact same move that I did, and I was so scared I was afraid to look away from the road for even a second. So I didn't. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I'd been to this neighborhood a couple of times, and I knew that it had some dead ends for resident driveways. I was terrified I would end up in one of these. I made a bunch of crazy turns and passed a gas station trying to not panic or turn into one of these dead ends. I lost sight of them for a second, and I quickly parked my car between 2 others. I ran out of my car into the dark area between 2 houses, where I sat behind a bush, crying and shaking. I waited a while before I got up and walked around the neighborhood with stealth until the coast was clear. I knew that they would recognize me or my car, and I didn't know what would happen if I was inside. Did I do the right thing there? Is there a better way to prevent this? If you're enjoying the video, please drop a like. 3. Landlord Tries to Break In When I Was 16 by OKGas775 on Let's Not Meet on Reddit. I just woke up in the middle of the night remembering and needing to get it off my chest. When I was about 16, my dad and brothers and I lived in an old rundown house in the middle of nowhere. It was private rental. My brother would do work for the landlord to pay our rent. Our landlord never came off as particularly creepy, but that could be because I rarely went outside when he came over. And my dad, he wouldn't dare do anything in front of my dad. I was home alone one day, and my dad and brothers went out somewhere I don't remember. I had my dog in my fenced-in yard outside, but that was it. I was in my room doing whatever I was doing, probably playing Sims 2. We lived in the middle of nowhere, and there was a long driveway, which the window of my bedroom directly faced. I could see or hear anyone driving up the driveway. I saw a car, not my dad's, and I immediately freaked out. I ran and shut all the blinds in the house and turned off the lights and checked the doors were locked. It was our landlord. He lived next door about 2 miles from the house, and yes, that was the closest house. This was the first time he had come by unexpectedly. It happened twice before. Both times I was home alone. This was the first 2 times he was only there for about 10 minutes, walking around outside the house, and then quickly leaving. But this time was different. I grabbed a big kitchen knife and hid under the kitchen table. I heard him pull up outside of the front gate, and my dog was outside going crazy, barking. I heard him yell, "Shut up, mutt!" I could hear his footsteps walking up to the door. He tried to open the front door, and I was freaking out at this point. I texted my dad he was coming straight home, but they'd be like an hour. He continued to walk around the outside of our house, trying to peek in each window. The house is old and has 3 doors you can enter from. He tried all 3. I thought maybe he didn't know I was home. Maybe the last 2 times were a coincidence, but he started saying things including calling out my name. He knew I was home and I was alone. I couldn't hear what else he was saying through the brick walls, but quietly creeped through the house following his voice up and down the hallway. I was trying to hear what he was saying. That's when he said something I'll never forget. "I'm gonna burn the house down, but I'll let you out first." Of course, I didn't take him seriously, which scares me even more. He wanted me to come out. He wanted me to take his threats seriously, That's the part that gets me. I know exactly what would have happened if I would have believed him, and my life would have been completely different. He was there for at least 30 minutes, or maybe closer to an hour. He was persistent. He left before my dad came home. I told him everything, and we moved out soon after. I still don't know how he knew I was home alone. My dad never saw him on his way driving out, so he knew my dad was gone because there was no car in the driveway. But how did he know I was there? How did he know I wasn't with him? That's why Creep Landlord will never meet again. Edit. I just realized now that we were evicted, and we didn't leave. We lived in a caravan at my uncle's house for a year before finding a house in a different town. 1. A serious encounter by Vogel Frey on True Scary Stories from Reddit. The year was 2011, and I just moved out of my mom's house, and I was living at my best friend's house from high school. After a few months of living there, she had a bad habit of going into my room and jumping on my bed, and pulling my blankets off to wake me up. Well, one morning I was woken up to something jumping on my bed, and I was so tired that I was just trying to extend my legs out to kick her off my bed. But my ankle had an enormous amount of pressure on it. I couldn't move them. I felt chills go through my body, and the jumping continued, but nothing was there. And finally the pressure was released, and I fell out of my bed, and I ran out of the apartment in my underwear. It was 7 a.m., and I finally got the nerve to go back inside. I walked into my room, and there was a nervous feeling. I looked at my bed and saw 2 indents on the blanket, closely together. That's the crazy part about this. When I fell out of bed, I don't think the blanket moved. As if whatever was jumping on the bed was still standing there, holding the blanket in place. That's the only way I could explain to myself how I saw the marks still there. After that day, I spent the rest of the time sleeping in the living room, and I wouldn't go to bed until after the sun came up, and had the lights on no matter what. That went on for about 2 months. Fast forward a few months from that, had some problems happen with my friend and moved back home to my old childhood room, my safe haven, that would soon change. When I moved back, I brought the same bed that I had in my prior encounter, with the one night, and I slept facing the side of the room. I woke up to a noise, very distinctive noise, the sound of something dragging its feet on the carpet. It was pacing back and forth next to me, and suddenly, right in my face, growling, heavy breath. Then to the left of my face it began to pace again and again, once again coming back to my face and repeating, for one last time. In my face I hear it pace move away from me, and it stopped. I didn't open my eyes during this. A few weeks later, my mom gave me a blessed sacred heart charm. She told me to wear it and never take it off, and she hugged me and said she loved me. Months later, while her and I were smoking outside, drinking, she asked me if anything happened since then, and I told her no. She told me that that night before she gave me that charm, I had scared her. From her account, I came into their room about 3 or 4 in the morning, and I pushed the door open and just stood there in their doorway. She woke up and asked me if I needed anything. She woke up and asked me if I was okay or if I needed anything. I was mute. I was just standing there for a minute or so. She said, then I walked back to my room. I still, to this day, don't know what that was about, or any of these encounters. For some context, the previous owner died in my mom's room. Also, my nephew would talk to someone. He was 6 at the time. I would babysit him while I was there, and downstairs getting his snack, walking back upstairs, and I could hear him having a full conversation with someone. I stopped short before getting to the room, and I could hear more clearly, but the floorboards made a noise, and he stopped, and immediately stopped talking. My sister would always say that he would wave bye to someone when he would leave this room. Some nights, when it was just me and him downstairs, I would hear walking upstairs in the rooms. 2. Eye of the Storm by Hovercraft Hot 670 on Scary Stories on Reddit. The day itself was long and boring. Not much really was going on. The evening at 3:30 p.m., it began to storm, and I sat in my bedroom for most of the afternoon watching YouTube and playing video games. Then I started to get tired and decided it was a great time to take a nap. I woke up around 5:25 to a tornado siren going off in the distance. It was now storming more violently, now the hail hitting my window and the side of my house, and then I could spot a cloud that looked as though they were forming into a tornado. Opened my blinds and looked for a second and saw nothing. About 6 o'clock, the tornado siren was going off again, and I was eating dinner. I could hear cars going down the street, and perhaps those people were rushing home because of the tornado siren. The siren was going off every few minutes, and I was unable to check the weather report as the power went off about 15 minutes ago. I then checked out my window as I had been doing regularly and saw the clouds that were dark and low. The tornado siren had gone off once again, and this time the tornado on the ground. I saw it form. It was just a while away. During tornadoes, you want to get as low to the ground as possible, such as a basement. The only problem is I didn't have a basement. No basement, and I was too afraid to go outside, so I got under my table. It seemed to me that it was only logical. Suddenly, the siren went out, and it seemed like it had been gone off for a while. That time, it was about 7, and outside it was dark, and the sun hadn't gone down. Suddenly, a loud noise like a train passing by began. It kept getting closer and closer, and then suddenly, the right wall of the living room was ripped off and lifted away. The rest soon followed. I wanted to get up and run, but I knew if I did, my chances of death would soon become an absolute certainty. The table I was under was pulled up, and I was blown to the side, facing up. For a split second, I saw something. I can't describe it. A horrendous appearance, but it looked like an eye. Well, perhaps an eye made out of multiple eyes. Hundreds of them, millions, trillions even. From what I could see, it looked directly at me, and I looked directly at it. Every night since, I've had this dream of the moment, but in these dreams, it talks to me. It tells me to do things. 3. This story is a trigger warning for child abuse. Please do not listen to it if you do not want to hear this. Serial Killer's Notebook by Zombie Fox 404 from Scary Stories on Reddit. So I, male 48, recently went to go help my mother clean out a house. It took weeks. She is a hoarder, and just so you understand what I mean, she has about 6 different drawers full of unused soap bars, and when I asked why she had so many, her only answer was just in case I needed them. I'm her only remaining family, as I was an only child, and my father, her husband, passed away from cancer at a young age, and all of her siblings, so relatives are either dead or not in our country. So I officially made it my choice a few months ago to put her in a nursing home. Anyways, the final room I had to clean out was the attic, and when I tell you that there were piles of boxes just filled with books, it took me around 5 hours to sort through, and about 95% of those books just went into the bag for donation. So when I got to the final box, it felt like a miracle from God, to say the least. I was honestly prepared to just throw the whole box into the donation bag, but I'm glad I didn't. I just regret it a ton most days. I found an old tattered notebook. I felt like if I touched it, it was going to disintegrate. I cleaned off all the dust and assumed I had found one of those memory book picture things. But instead I found a journal. It was handwritten. It was messy and absolutely did not belong to either my mom or my dad. I just assumed my mom picked it up at one of those church sales she loves going to. But after reading a couple pages, I wasn't so sure. This book has haunted my nightmares. Anytime I close my eyes, I just visualize the things that I've read within this notebook. And despite my utter fear of it, it would be dumb to make this post and not recant some of the pages here. June 26, 1978. I don't understand why it's so morally wrong to kill someone. People just don't understand the thrill of it. It's the same as taking drugs. The first dose, it's the best thing imaginable, and then the second or third, or any time after, it can't live up to the first hit. So many people like to say, don't knock it till you try it. So why are people so immediately one to shame murderers? I have a theory that if someone tries it once, that they'll understand the righteousness of it. Having someone under your control, under your hands, watching as their face contort, to shock, to fear, to anger, to desperation, and then finally to despair. Seeing the life drain from their eyes, letting you be the last face that they see as you crush their windpipe. the small gurgle that reaches up from the back of their throats as they attempt their final breath. It's almost orgasmic. July 3rd, 1978. I still remember my first kill like it was yesterday. It was an accident, sure, but it was still just incredible, as if I'd intended to do it. I was 10, and my mom had called me over to watch the baby as she went to go pee. I knew I didn't have a choice. Being asked to do something is never a choice. You already expected to do it. So I agreed and sat on the stool she was on originally, and watched as the babbling ball of flesh squished in the water. That thing hated me. Any time it looked at me, it would cry, as if it knew what I was. This time was no different. The second it noticed its sweet mommy was gone, it screamed at the top of its lungs, wailing like a banshee. I swear, it's like it wanted to destroy my eardrums. So I decided to make it stop. I grabbed its little malleable head and shoved it under the water. I had always been told staying underwater for too long was a bad thing, but it was never taught why. Its screams turned into bubbles, and it was quiet until the bubbles stopped, and then a new scream replaced it, one of my mother. I removed my hands as she screamed at me and asked what I had done. I watched as she took the rag doll out of the bathtub and tried to get some life back into it. I immediately brought out the crocodile tears, explaining between sobs that it was an accident, that he actually put his head under the water and I was bringing him back up. But God, that feeling, I had watched his body go limp, and it was one that I never forgot. That's just 2 passages of the notebook. I'll spare you the rest. 1. Stranger tried to hug me on the sidewalk by Pew Pew 332 on Creepy Encounters on Reddit. The encounter happened a few months ago. For context, I, 18 male, live about 1.5 kilometers away from a shopping center, or just under a mile. The route I usually take requires me to turn 2 corners and walk straight for the rest of the journey. Although pretty early in the walk, there is a tall apartment building to the left of the pathway. Along the main road, I would say it's about 4 or 5 levels. I live in a shady area. Previously, the apartment block had a case of stabbings that killed a woman a year before. My story takes place witnessing the cleanup crew hosing down the area that it happened. This caused me to be pretty wary of the area in general. On this day in particular, I needed to go to the shopping center to pick up a couple of supplies. I noticed, as I started walking down the pathway, that the sky was pretty dark. It was early in the afternoon, so it meant that the storm was on its way. Not a drop of rain had fell as I made my way to the shop. Once I had arrived, I picked up what I needed and went window shopping for a while. When I was satisfied, I exited through the door I had originally entered and began to walk back home. I made it to the final set of traffic lights, and it was probably about a 7-minute walk away from my house. The rain started to trickle at first, and then after that it poured very heavily. 3 minutes later, I could see the apartment block about 20 meters ahead to the right. The rain was pouring down, so the visibility wasn't great. But I could make out what was a man in a green poncho. He had the hood of the poncho up over his head, and a big grin on his face for some reason. As I got closer and closer to him, I didn't like the feeling that I was getting. He reached his arm out, almost as if he was attempting to bring me into an embrace. The man was about 5-meter distance from me when I took the opportunity to cross into the medium strip of the main road. I noticed his glance follow me as I crossed into the medium's grassy patch. But even though there was no traffic, he didn't chase me. He just continued to walk along the path, and he kept eye contact with me. The thought of what might have happened if I had walked into his arms still frightens me to this day. Even if he didn't mean any harm, and he wasn't trying to grab me, I still didn't like the vibe I got from him. And when I reached the middle of the road, I felt safer and relieved, especially considering he didn't attempt to follow me. 2. Almost Killed by My Dealer by Darklord5689. To start this story off, it isn't mine, but rather one that my dad told me about my Uncle Edward. My Uncle Edward died from pneumonia back in 2014 when I was young. I was too young to remember anything about my Uncle Edward, except for the sight of his lifeless body laying in the casket. That sight is now burned into my mind. Later, my dad told me that my uncle had been an alcoholic and drug addict. My uncle addiction caused him to lie and steal from my dad and other members of the family. My dad had told me stories about my Uncle Edward, some good, some bad. To this day we are going to talk about one of the most scariest stories I've ever heard regarding my uncle. This took place sometime in the late 90s, before I was born. My uncle and dad were living with my nana at the time, and my dad had noticed that the window on the Ford Escort were shattered. Suspicious my uncle had something to do with it, my dad confronted him about it. My uncle had lied and said that there were kids responsible for it, but my dad knew that it was a load of crap. So he gave my uncle a good beating until he told the truth. The truth is that my uncle didn't have a car, so he stole my dad's car to go meet with some drug dealers. My uncle owed the dealers some money, but he didn't have any. My uncle drove off, but the dealers shot at him, intending to kill him, but the police were never called. My uncle was lucky that time, but later on my uncle's addiction was taking a toll on his health, and later developed pneumonia. From the drug abuse, his body was unable to fight off the pneumonia, and ultimately died. It was a very hard thing to live with, the fact that I never got to know my uncle due to the drugs. Oh yeah, and those drug dealers who tried to kill my uncle, I hope you rot in jail where you belong. 3. Not So Pleasant Little Caesars Experience by Happy Jalapeno 06. True Scary Stories on Reddit. This happened to me a while back, when I was a senior in high school. I started working in order to make some money for myself, as we were soon leaving my hometown of Rutland, Vermont. I applied to work at Little Caesars, location at the outskirts of the city, and a week later I was called in for my first day on Monday. It's worth saying that me and my family were moving to Atlanta due to my dad's job in a couple of weeks. So the first week went by real fast, and I was enjoying the first work experience in my life. But little did I know everything would go straight downhill on Friday. That day I was working the night shift, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., which is closing time. I entered the establishment as usual and said goodbye to some of my coworkers who had just finished their shift. As I received a phone call from my best friend, a customer, walked in the restaurant, so I wasn't allowed to answer my phone. The man was probably about 6'3" and around 40s. I noticed he had a gun inside his jacket, but he was so calm I didn't think he was going to rob the place. Also, locations like this don't have much cash in the register. He ordered around 5 hot and readies and 2 breadsticks. He paid and I handed him his food. Around 3.5 hours later, it was closing time and my coworker Kate was grabbing her stuff to leave. I was signing out on the monitor and I stored some sauce in the fridge. Suddenly the power went out and it was pitch black. I tried to find the back door to check the generator, and I heard some utensils fall in the closet. This was unusual as everything was perfectly placed every night by Kate, so normally I thought it was playing a prank on me. I yelled, "Seriously, Kate?" Very original. No response after 30 seconds was weird. I opened the door and heard a breathing coming from the lobby. Immediately the same man from earlier jumped me and pointed his gun to the left side of my head. He demanded me to hand over the register cash and my wallet. I wrestled with him for under a minute, and he pushed me to the counter where the register was. I threw my wallet at him, and he crouched to find it, but it was pitch black, and I was able to find a pizza cutter to arm myself, to try to protect myself and the money in the register. Looking back at this, I should have just given it to him. Instead of risking my life and my job, I was leaving in a few weeks anyways. The guy threw his gun at me and hit me in the knee as he ran off through the door. I called the cops after and restored the power. I checked the dude's gun and realized it was just an airsoft clock. Felt so stupid and now I laugh about it. I continued my job at that location until I left state, not before asking the local PD for updates on the man. They weren't able to identify him as there was little to no evidence other than the airsoft gun and my wallet that had my student ID. Not really a scary story, but kind of creepy in context of the situation, and definitely not paranormal happening. Just a stupid thief and even stupider employee. And that's where our tale comes to an end, for now. 1. Scary Misinterpretation by My Goat is Blue on True Scary Stories on Reddit. Here's a story I've told a couple of friends, but never posted anywhere. Yet, a scary experience from a few years back, with a humorous ending. One night, I was up about 6 a.m. and hadn't slept. I was laying in bed on my phone, curtains drawn, and I heard jerky footsteps on the deck outside, like those of a person stumbling around under the influence of something. I was so scared that I couldn't move or check the window to see who it was or how they were doing. The footsteps got closer and closer to the front of the house, and then I heard knocking on the window. Not mine, the one next to the front door. I felt like my heart was gonna explode. I didn't think about the fact that it might be someone that needed help or someone that maybe just walked up to the nearest house for aid. I was too scared and assumed it was some crackhead or drunk, or maybe a serial killer. I knew that the front door was locked, although immediately after knocking on the window, the jerky footsteps took off running. Still, short of stumbling around on the wooden deck, I didn't hear anything else after that, and eventually I fell asleep. At lunch, my brother perked up and says, "I saw a deer this morning. It was right in front of the house. It took off when I knocked on the window." At least I got some closure. If you're enjoying these stories, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. 2. Some Lingering Creep by Eligiagio on True Scary Stories on Reddit. For what it's worth, here's some context. I live with my parents and my little brother on a farm in the countryside of Tasmania, just outside the town. It's too long to walk, but a short drive. There is around 7 or 8 houses on a 2-kilometer gravel road that I live on. So, my neighbors are sparse, but not far. My gravel driveway is about 60 to 100 meters long. At the bottom, where it connects to the main road, is about a 10-ish square meter shed to the right of a large 60-ish square meter shed to the left. Both these sheds and the road dock connects to the left and right of the driveway. They are owned by a man from the mainland. He's never here. So, it was probably last year, can't really remember. Dad and I was 17 or 18 at the time, we were heading home at night and just pulled up to the road at the bottom of the driveway. And Dad thought he could see movement in one of the little sheds, which is always locked and is occupied or used for anything. He stopped there and went to check it out. He tested the door and it wouldn't open and flashed his phone torch through the little window to the left. He would have only been able to see to the left of the window and not the right. Dad comes back and asked me if I saw anything, but I wasn't paying attention and I said no. He told me he thought he saw a head move out of the way when the light of his car shined into the shed. We moved past this and assumed it was nothing. Fast forward either a few days or a couple of weeks later, it was late at night and I was addicted to this YouTube, so I was up watching some nonsense as usual. I heard what sounded like walking on the gravel outside my bedroom. I live in a shed. My bedroom is at the front and connected to the front driveway. There's a picnic table out there at the front of my room, and the barbecue is too. I thought nothing of it because, 1, there are a million wallabies, or probably I would heard them jumping around all the time. And not to mention that we have cats that are free to come and go as they please. And there are possums too. I wasn't going to let my anxiety keep me up for too late. I decided that it was probably just an awkward animal and went back to YouTube, and the sound stopped. Whatever the sound happened again, and I stopped and listened to it. Whatever, and again, a third time. It was then that I realized that there have never been any animals that walked in this pattern, so I started getting a little anxious, and I turned off my iPad and listened. My senses were heightened. It was human footsteps. I knew it was familiar. The footsteps were lingering around outside of my bedroom, and that's what makes it worse. It is my room and has a glass door that leads outside. And I sleep with my curtains open right where I could hear the footsteps. I was freaking out, 'cause who was it? I got out of bed and looked outside, because the footsteps ventured into the grass and back to the right of my room, so they wouldn't have seen me if I looked outside. I could see the figure of a man in a hoodie, and went right back to bed. I'm so glad that Mom is a light sleeper and wakes up at the quietest noise. She must have alerted Dad, who went to the front door and aggressively asked who it was. The man was looking for one of my older brothers. I think he kept mumbling my brother's name, and that's all I could make out. My dad told him to F off. He He bolted down the road. Two older brothers don't live with me. They're delinquents, and this is their legal address. It must have been the man from the shed, 'cause Dad looked in again the following day, and it looked like someone was squatting in there. Sorry for the long story. I know it's not that crazy of a story, but when you're a teen who gets night anxiety, it's pretty freaky. 3. Late Night Car Chase with a Deranged Uber Driver by Legit Wannabe on Let's Not Meet from Reddit. I live on the outskirts of one of the largest cities in the Northeast, in a quiet section of the city with a small town feel. I go to the gym in the suburbs. I was headed home after a pretty intense workout, ready to go home and pet my dog and take a much-needed shower. Now, to get back to my section of the city from the suburbs, there's an old 4-lane bridge that leads into the few of the main streets. The lanes aren't separated by markings, but there are signs on the bridge and everyone respects that it's 2 cars to a lane. As I was driving across the bridge, I stay in the right lane to go straight across, as the left lane is to turn lane. As I reached the end of the lane, I noticed that there was a car at the end. It was over in my lane by about a foot, and I did my best to cut around him. One of my tires ended up a bit on the sidewalk. I made my way into my lane, and I glanced over at him. I didn't flip him off or act aggressively, but I'm sure my face expressed my thoughts. The light turned green, and I went straight across, and I noticed that the car had been blocking the lane, despite being in the turning lane, went straight as well, looking at me in my rearview mirror. I could see illuminated the Uber light on his windshield. I continued up the residential streets, stopping at each stop sign up on the way, and the car remaining behind me the whole way. As I was already thinking, this guy doesn't know how to drive, I kept an eye on my rearview mirror as I approached another main street in the area. As I was waiting at the light, I noticed that the guy had turned his Uber light off, and something in me realized that there was something wrong. I'm not sure what it was, but the Uber light gave me some sort of comfort that this guy was working, and his conscious act of turning it off made me very uneasy. As I turned onto the main street, I made the first left that I could, and the Uber made the turn behind me. I was now in a residential street, but as I knew the area, I drove at a consistent pace, making a couple of turns ahead towards the highway. The Uber pursued, but his bumper was about 1.5 feet away from mine. Halfway down the residential street, there was no doubt in my mind that I was being pursued. Now, despite having a very buttoned-up office job and soft-spoken personality, I don't necessarily think I'm a prime target. I'm a big guy, between 6'5" and 6'6", a little under 220 pounds of muscle, and I have a ton of tattoos. I'm sure this guy saw me as I pulled up next to him on the bridge. From my glance at him, he looked to be much older and smaller than myself. While thoughts of pulling over and escalating things did cross my mind, the rising gun crimes in my city, that thought was gone as soon as it came. All I could focus on was getting to a safe place and making sure that this maniac didn't find out where I lived. As I turned onto the highway, he followed again, cutting across several lanes and escalating to catch up to me. I made the first right I was able to, then led him down a winding maze of back streets, his car inches from mine. I wasn't paying attention to stop signs or one-way signs or even speed limits at this point. I just knew I needed to get away from him. All the while, the Uber driver followed, matching my speed and taking every sharp turn that I did through the maze of streets. Then I realized I needed to get back to a more populated area, in case this guy decided to shoot me or hit me with his car. I headed back in the direction of the main street, and then I spotted out of the corner of my eye a parking lot of a fast food restaurant that provided a shortcut to the main road. I blasted through the parking lot. This man speeding in after me. I felt hopeless. As if this guy was willing to follow me through all of that, he couldn't stop until he caught me. I weighed my options. I turned onto the main street again, and the police department was about a 10-minute drive away, but there were several lights and crosswalks between myself and safety. I decided that I would head through the back streets. I was trying my best to lose him as I went. I didn't want to give this guy an opportunity to get out of his car in a red light and hurt me. I had to head in that direction and pray we didn't hit any red lights. I'd rounded the corner out of the parking lot, and my worst-case scenario was realized. A red light, with a car already stopped. I don't one way to my left, with a car ready to make a turn. I know it was irresponsible, But I didn't hesitate. I merged into the oncoming lane and made a left going the wrong way down a one-way residential street. A few beeps from the other cars around me rang out, but I didn't care. I just prayed that I made an irresponsible enough maneuver to throw this guy off, and created enough confusion to get away. I looked in my rearview mirror and didn't see any headlights. I drove to the end of the block, and I made a few random turns down some side streets, pulling into a parking lot of an apartment complex and turning my car off. My adrenaline was winding down, and I couldn't stop shaking. I laid my seat all the way back and called the non-emergency line. The lady who answered the phone was entirely unhelpful and directed me to 911. I gave them a description of the car and the guy, whose face I couldn't recall. Well, the police told me that they were just going to write it up as a disturbance. They told me to drive home, as some time had passed between the chase ending and their getting to me. Being the ever-paranoid person that I am, I parked for several blocks down from my house, changed clothes in my car, and put a hat on, and walked home. I was on the lookout for this guy in his car the whole way. I thought I saw a car turn left down another block as I walked, but I told myself that even if it was him, he wouldn't be able to recognize me outside of my car. And now that I'm home, typing this up, my large dog next to me, and a drink in my hand, I feel helpless. I'm scared to drive my car in the city. I might run into this crazy person. I'm scared of what he might do to me. I'm worried that this guy will drive around and see my car, find out where I live, and try to come after me or my family. I've never felt this vulnerable in my entire life. I've never considered purchasing a weapon, but this encounter is making me consider it. All I can do now is try to move on, and hope he doesn't get any rides in my area. So, deranged Uber driver who chased me through blocks of streets in the city because he didn't understand traffic patterns, let's not meet. And that's where our tale comes to an end, for now. Did the shadows of the story linger in your mind, or did they vanish with the dawn? Remember, darkness isn't always about what you can see. It's also about what you can't. If you enjoyed the chill down your spine, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more eerie tales that will haunt you. Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked, and sweet dreams, or rather nightmares. I'll see you in the shadows, and remember, don't shoot the messenger.